Imagine a nation drowning in despair. The land of Israel, once bursting with promise, lay in ruins. For 20 long years, the people suffered under the iron grip of Jabin, the king of Canaan, and his ruthless commander, Sisera. Life was unbearable. Fields were empty, trade routes abandoned, families broken. Fear ruled every heart, and Sisera's 900 iron chariots were a constant reminder of their helplessness. The Israelites cried out to God, but their voices were filled with guilt and regret. They had turned away from him, worshiping idols and chasing after false gods. Now, oppressed and broken, they begged for deliverance. Would God listen? Would he act? And then into this chaos stepped an unlikely leader. Deborah. Her name meant bee, a fitting symbol for a woman who would sting her enemies and bring the sweetness of hope to her people. She wasn't a warrior or a king. She was a prophetess, a woman who heard the voice of God and spoke his truth. In a time when women were often overlooked, Deborah rose like a beacon of light. She was the only female judge in Israel's history, a reminder that God chooses leaders not based on human qualifications, but on faith and obedience. Picture her sitting beneath the palm tree, a symbol of wisdom and righteousness. The people came to her with their disputes, their questions, their cries for help. She didn't lead with weapons or brute force. She led with wisdom, discernment, and unwavering trust in the Lord. But Deborah's role wasn't limited to settling arguments or offering advice. God had chosen her for something far greater. One day, as she sat beneath the palm, the voice of the Lord came to her with a command that would change Israel's destiny. Take 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun and go to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera and his army to you, and I will deliver them into your hands. This was no ordinary call. This was a call to face a ruthless enemy with an army that seemed invincible. Sisera's chariots were the ancient equivalent of tanks, unstoppable, indestructible. Who would dare to stand against such power? Deborah summoned Barak, a respected military leader, to deliver God's command. She spoke with the authority of someone who knew God's voice intimately. The Lord has commanded you, go, take 10,000 men and prepare for battle. The Lord will deliver Sisera into your hands. But Barak hesitated. Can you blame him? He wasn't doubting God. He was doubting himself. How could he, with his small army, defeat Sisera's chariots? His voice trembled as he replied, if you go with me, I will go. But if you won't go, I won't go. Barak's request wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a cry for reassurance. He wanted the presence of Deborah, the woman who carried God's authority, to strengthen him. And Deborah, filled with grace, agreed. I will go with you, she said. But know this, the honor of victory will not be yours. The Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. What a humbling moment for Barak. And what faith from Deborah. She wasn't afraid to step into the chaos, because she trusted in the God who had already written the story of victory. The preparations began. 10,000 men were gathered from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. They climbed Mount Tabor, looking out over the valley where Sisera's army awaited them. Can you imagine their fear as they saw the enemy's chariots gleaming in the distance, their numbers far greater than their own? But Deborah's voice broke through the fear. Go. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? And with that, the Israelites charged down the mountain. Then the miraculous happened. The Bible tells us that God sent a mighty storm. Rain poured from the heavens, and the dry ground turned to thick, sticky mud. Sisera's chariots, those terrifying machines of war, were useless. They sank into the mud, stuck and helpless. The very thing that had given Sisera his power was now his downfall. Panic spread through the Canaanite army. Barak and his men overwhelmed them, striking down every soldier. It was a total victory, one that could only have been orchestrated by God. But Sisera, the cruel commander, escaped on foot. He ran for his life, desperate for refuge, until he came to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. The Kenites had a peaceful alliance with Jabin, so Sisera assumed he was safe. Jael greeted him with kindness, inviting him into her tent. She offered him milk and covered him with a blanket, soothing his fears. But Jael had a plan. She had seen the suffering of Israel, and she wasn't about to let Sisera continue his reign of terror. As he lay sleeping, exhausted from the battle, Jael took a tent peg and a hammer. With one decisive blow, she ended his life. When Barak arrived, Jael met him with the news. "Come, I will show you the man you're looking for." And there lay Sisera, defeated not by an army, but by the courage of a woman. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The honor of victory belonged not to Barak, but to Jael, and ultimately to God. That day marked the beginning of peace for Israel. Deborah and Barak sang a song of victory, a song that celebrated God's power and faithfulness. When the princes of Israel take the lead, when the people willingly offer themselves, praise the Lord, they sang. They remembered how the earth shook, the heavens poured, and God himself went before his people. Deborah's story isn't just a tale of the past, it's a message for us today. How many of us are like the Israelites, crying out to God in our brokenness, yet doubting his power to deliver us? How many of us are like Barak, hesitant to step into the calling God has placed on our lives because we feel inadequate or afraid? And how many of us, like Deborah, are being called to rise up in faith, trusting that God can do the impossible through us? Deborah wasn't a warrior, she wasn't a king, but she was willing. She listened to God's voice and obeyed even when the task seemed impossible. She led not with fear, but with faith. And that same God who called Deborah is calling you. He's calling you to step out in faith, to trust him in the battles of your life. Whether you're facing fear, doubt, or the weight of sin, remember this: God doesn't abandon his people. He goes before you, just as he went before Deborah and Barak. The victory doesn't come from your strength, it comes from his. All he asks is that you trust him, that you surrender your life to him, and that you let him lead. Today, as you hear this story, ask yourself, what is God calling me to do? What battles am I afraid to face, and will I trust him to go before me? Surrender your life to him. Let him fight your battles. And like Deborah, you'll see that with God, even the impossible becomes possible. And like Deborah, you will see victory, not by your strength, but by his. The story of Deborah is a reminder that when we put our faith in God, victory is not just possible, it's promised. Will you trust him today? Share in the comments below. What lessons from Deborah's story inspire you most? How has God helped you overcome seemingly impossible odds in your life? If you feel moved by this story, let us know how it has impacted you. And if you're ready to surrender your battles to God, type "I trust you, Lord" in the comments as your declaration of faith. Let's encourage one another as we walk in faith together.